It's time to get the story behind the story. Interviews with newsmakers, news breakers, and Vermonters making a difference. WCAX presents 802 News with Mark Johnson. Here's Mark.
Ginny Sweetser died by suicide almost 4 years ago, losing her long battle with PTSD after serving in Iraq. In this edition of 802 News, we spoke with her mom, Susan, a former Vermont state senator and one-time congressional candidate. Susan is part of an effort to make sure every Vermont veteran has a wreath on their grave this holiday season. You'll find a link to sponsor wreaths on the page for this 802 News episode. First, a word from our sponsor. At Red Hen Baking Company, they believe pure, uncomplicated ingredients in the hands of skilled artisans are the building blocks for great food. They're dedicated to creating the best food from the best ingredients. You'll find an ever-changing lineup of delicious pastries, sandwiches, and soups at their beautiful cafe off Route 2 in Middlesex, just off I-89. Their breads are also available in many other locations. Led by owners Randy George and Eliza Kane, Red Hen Baking Company has been on the leading edge of the local food movement since 1999.
Oh, Ginny, just such a unique kid. She was, she's the one who made me a mom. And she was just filled with energy, filled with love. She loved sports. I mean, that was a big thing for Ginny was her sports. And I had her on the ice as a figure skater, which she despised because she wanted to play hockey with the boys. And I remember her saying to me, "Mom, I don't want to do this." And she could execute those jumps perfectly, except she looked like a football player trying to do ballet because she had no desire to have those jumps look pretty. And so I cut her a deal that if she'd keep figure skating for 1 year, I'd let her play hockey as long as she would give it a try. And at the end of the year, it was clear. You could see her love for hockey when she was on the ice, and you could see how much she despised figure skating. So she became a hockey player. You know, one of the pioneers in Vermont to play with the boys. There was a group of Vermont girls from Essex and Burlington and Stowe, and there were no girls' teams when they started, so they played with the boys. She eventually made it to the Vermont select team. She also was a phenomenal skier. She was on the Smugglers Notch racing team. She played Little League. She played catcher because she kept getting hit by the ball in her eye. So she decided to be a catcher because she had that mask so that the ball couldn't hit her in the eye anymore. Yeah, that was my Ginny. And she just had so much love. She was a page when I was in the legislature and her dad was in the legislature. And, you know, when we had started a nonprofit to help victims of violent crime in Vermont, and Ginny, who was seriously just a kid, she was 10, 11, and 12 years old. If we weren't home when somebody called who needed help, Ginny would talk to them. At that age, I would never know what to say to somebody, but Ginny did. She had a heart that was as big as that beautiful smile of hers.
Were you surprised when she said she wanted to go into the military?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. It was, when 9/11 happened, I was in Tokyo. Ginny's sisters were 4 and 5 years old. Ginny was in college. I remember, like, when I was finally able to get back home because the planes weren't flying in the days after 9/11. Ginny told me she was going to join. She was going to join the Army. And the first time she told me that, I talked her out of it because I didn't want my daughter to be in harm's way. And if she had been my son, I probably would have done the same thing. You know, if that doesn't make me much of a patriot, well, then so be it. It's my child. And I didn't want my child in harm's way. So the second time she told me she was going to join, I talked her out of it again. The third time she told me that she was going to join, I talked her out of it again. And what Ginny learned from all of that is, don't tell mom, go do it, and then tell her afterwards. And on the first anniversary of 9/11, that is exactly what she did. She was in Kansas City, Missouri at the time. She was at UMKC. And that kid, her unit, like in the days afterwards, because she signed up for the Army Reserve. She was in college at the time, and she had postponed starting her basic training until January so she could finish out her fall semester. And because it would be winter and she was going to do her basic at Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri, that it would be cooler there because evidently Fort Leonard Wood is just like an oven if you have to go in the summer months. Just after she had enlisted, her unit got called up in that first big wave that went into Iraq. And because she was not eligible to go with them, that meant that somebody else had to backfill for her and that she was at the top of the list the next time there was a major deployment. So she did her basic training at Fort Leonard Wood in January of 2003. Her dad and we went out for her graduation from basic training, and then she stayed at Fort Leonard Wood to do her advanced training after that. She was a driver of the heavy equipment transports and a mechanic, which was kind of ironic because these things are huge, like massively huge. And the tires were bigger than Ginny was. And, she needed a ladder to climb into this thing. She finished her AT. She came back. She went back to school in the fall of 2003 at UMKC. And I remember, Mark, I was working for Mass Mutual at the time, and I was attending a conference at Pinehurst in North Carolina. And I had, it was a Friday, I had taken a break to come back to my room to think about getting ready for supper. And I had turned on the TV, and there was, breaking news. President Bush had just called up another major deployment. And so I called Ginny. I'm watching it on the news. I called Ginny, and I said to her, Jen, are you going to be impacted by this deployment? It's on the news. And she didn't know anything about it. She's a student. And while I was on the phone with her, because this was the technology at the time, I could hear the little clicks, which meant she had a call coming in. And she said, Mom, hang on, I got a call coming in. So she took the call, and when she came back on, she said, Mom, I've been activated, and I've got 10 days to get my affairs in order to transition from a full-time student to a full-time soldier. So I just dropped what I was doing, flew to Kansas City to help her because she had her dog and her cats, and she had an apartment, and just trying to help her with that, her car. And I drove her car and her cats and her dog back to Vermont. And then she deployed. They sent her out to Fort Riley in Kansas. That was the makeup of the 443rd Transportation Company. It was a lot of people who had never trained together because they were all the people, or a lot of them were the people who didn't go in the first wave, and they were at the top of the list to go in the second major deployment. I had the opportunity because the members of the 443rd invited me to go to their 20th reunion this past summer. And, they shared what that was like with me. They basically had 6 weeks of training together, and then they were shipped out to Forward Operating Base Spiker in Tikrit, where they were for 15 months.
And I would imagine you probably worried about her every day.
Oh, it was as much as I was dealing with my own, pardon my expression, but as much as I was dealing with my own shit, I knew I had to keep it together because I had her little sisters who were just They were 5 and 6 at the time. Just before, I remember Christmas of 2003. I remember talking to Ginny on the phone and saying, "Are they going to give you any time, like, for Christmas?" And she said, "Mom, we haven't heard anything." I said, "Okay, well, I'm coming to Kansas City, and I'll drive to Fort Riley, and if they don't let me see you, they can arrest me with my 2 kids." And I came out to Kansas City with Frankie and Katie. And thankfully, I think they gave them a 36-hour pass or something. Maybe it was a 48-hour pass. I remember staying at the Westin at the Crown Center, which is right by where all the Hallmark headquarters is, and the very historic old train station in Kansas City. I remember when I checked in with, my 2 little girls in tow, and I was a mess, like literally a mess. And the woman at the front desk asking me if I was okay, and me looking at her and going, "No, I'm not." And she asked what was wrong. And I told her that I was there to see my daughter before she shipped out, and that these were her little sisters, and, we were here to be with her for Christmas. Well, honest to God, I never knew what a presidential suite was, but I found out that day because they put us in this huge presidential suite, my $99 room on the top floor. And I remember I had told Frankie and Katie that we weren't going to have a Christmas tree because I couldn't deal with it, couldn't even think about it. And I remember when we opened the drapes in the living room of this suite, and there was this massive Christmas tree that was out on the plaza. And Katie saying to me, "I thought you said we weren't going to have a tree." And we were able to go pick Ginny up. She brought her ice skates, my amazing hockey player, who spent her senior year of high school playing hockey at the National Sports Academy in Lake Placid and playing in the Herb Brooks Arena every day. She was amazing. She took her sisters ice skating. We had a beautiful Christmas together. And then we had to say goodbye. And, didn't know if that might be the last time we'd see her. So for families of soldiers who deploy, that's what you think about. That's what you go through. You pray that they will be safe, but you don't know. We don't know what life's plan is for them. So when Ginny would call, Ginny ran convoys or was in convoys throughout Iraq. The heavy equipment transports, what they would do is they would move the tanks around and position them in the places that they were needed. It's not like you're going to drive a tank 250 miles to where it needs to go. It's going to get put on the back of a het, and they're going to position it where they need to be. So before they had the siege in Fallujah, Ginny and her other soldiers in her unit, they were the ones taking the tanks to Fallujah. I got to know all of these names because of where she would be in a convoy, Najaf and Baghdad and Mosul. And then sometimes she would be in Qatar. And I knew when Ginny was calling me from Qatar, to me that was like, when you're a kid and you're playing tag and you touch a tree and that's safety, like nobody can touch me here. That to me was safety for Ginny. When Ginny was in Qatar, I knew she was safe because oftentimes they'd have to go to Qatar to pick up supplies and then bring them back to whatever units needed them or for their own unit. Yeah, when Ginny would call and it would be at all hours, it wasn't like the old days where, it's not like now where you can call from anywhere on your cell phone. It wasn't like that. But she could call and we could talk, and I was so grateful for that. We didn't have FaceTime, but at least I could hear her voice. And when I heard her voice, my job was to be strong and to be encouraging and to be loving and to show no sign of, oh my God, I'm like I'm so grateful I'm hearing from you. And sometimes she would call at an hour that her sisters were still awake, that I could put them on, and sometimes I would wake them up so they could talk to her. Yeah, I was so grateful for that, because, that when our soldiers were deployed in Vietnam, or, when my dad was in World War II and any of our other World War II veterans, it would be months and months and months. There were no phone calls, it was letters, and you may or may not get them. So I was so grateful for those calls.
When did she come home?
Well, she came home, she was home for a couple weeks in August of 2004. It was her R&R. She had to have some dental work done, so she did go back to Kansas City, but she was home in Vermont. We went to I had a friend who had, maybe it was 4th of July. I think that's what it was. It was 4th of July. I had a friend who had a beautiful cottage on the Sound in Connecticut, and we went down there for a few days, and then she went back to Kansas City, and then she went back to Iraq. But there was a definite change in Ginny. I mean, you could see it then. And I look at just some of the pictures that we've gotten, that we have of her from when she first deployed and was first in country, and then throughout that deployment. You can see a change in her face, how she looked, how I think everything was just weighing so heavily on her. I know that there was, one of their jobs was to go retrieve tanks when they got blown up. But there was supposed to be a group ahead of them who would retrieve the bodies of the soldiers who had died when those tanks got blown up. And it was at least one time when a tank had, I don't remember if it was an IED, and the tank had rolled into the Tigris, Euphrates, I forget, rolled into a river. And those who were supposed to do the recovery of the soldiers hadn't made it there. And it was Ginny's unit, I believe. They had to get the tank. The bodies were still in it. And that really bothered Ginny. And then there was another incident involving, when they were in a convoy, their convoy, because they were dealing with IEDs all the time too. This was before, it's a new kind of warfare. Well, it was at the time. This was before all the vehicles were up armored. But the benefit of being in the HEPs was because they were so massive that even though her unit experienced a number of IEDs exploding, when that happened, it didn't kill the soldiers inside the vehicle. It disabled the vehicle, so it meant that they had to push it off and go around it, but it didn't kill the soldiers. They never lost anybody in Ginny's unit when they were in that deployment. It was afterwards. And, they were ordered they would have to ride in the middle of the road. That was what they were ordered to do. And if any vehicle was coming at them and it didn't yield, they were ordered to just keep going. So the vehicle would be crushed if it didn't move. And I know there was an incident involving a vehicle that Ginny was that the vehicle was crushed. And that weighed really heavily on her. And then there was a car bomb that had exploded in Baghdad. She didn't even remember this, because I remember her telling me this. And I wouldn't talk about it with her if she wasn't going to bring it up. But there was a time after she came back that I asked her about it. She had zero recollection. But this was during one of her phone calls when she had called home from Iraq, and she had told me that they had come upon, they were en route, and they were going through Baghdad, and they came upon a site where car bomb had just gone off, probably within 5 minutes of when they had gotten there. So it was nothing but carnage. She had gotten out of her vehicle, and she said there was a little boy, Katie's age, well, Frankie's age, and they're not even a year apart, who was in the street. And she said all she could do was hold him so that he didn't die by himself. And those were the things she told me about. God only knows what she didn't tell me about that she had seen. So, as humans, I would truly love to believe that we are programmed to love and to help. And war is brutal. It's just brutal. And I have to say that, if when we send our soldiers to war, we have to be prepared to help them when they come back, instead of throwing so many obstacles in front of them. And unfortunately, when Ginny came back, she came back to a system, Mark, that is not designed. Certainly, I think it's better now, but not nearly better enough. She came back to first having to get her benefits, as opposed to, hey, if you've seen combat, you should assume that these soldiers need something. And don't wait on them to apply. Provide them with benefits. It's pretty simple. She couldn't even she couldn't even leave the military at that point. When her enlistment was up, she was stop-lost, I think is the phrase, where, your enlistment is up. You can get out now, but because we were still in an active war, lots of soldiers were told, no, you can't get out. She was scheduled to deploy to Afghanistan with the Vermont Army National Guard unit. And it was clear that she was not going to be able to handle that. So the National Guard, or whoever her person was, tried to force her out on a medical discharge, which she didn't want. Ginny fought that because she believed that, this was her duty. Her duty was to go with her other soldiers. And she also believed that if she got a medical discharge, which I've since found out this is not true, but she believed that if she was discharged for a medical reason, she would not be able to re-enlist again after she had received treatment. So Mike Doobie was the adjutant general at the time. God love him, and I am so grateful to him. He made sure that, because it was so important to Ginny that she not have a medical discharge, they allowed her to have her, her honorable discharge, which she had earned. But that just began many years of Ginny dealing with the VA. She moved back to Kansas City because she wanted to finish college. She had been going to St. Mike's. I wish she would have stayed at St. Mike's, because she made some very good friends there. And she moved back to Kansas City. And she eventually got her degree at UMKC. And I remember Ginny deciding to go into a PTSD treatment program the summer after she graduated, which required her to, it was a residential treatment program. And I remember when she came home, her saying to me, Mom, if I had only known that if I just talked about it, I'd feel so much better than by burying it. And at that point, she went back to school to get her master's degree, which she did in 2 years, 2-year master's. She She got her master's in social work. She became a licensed clinical social worker in Kansas and Missouri. She also went through the police academy, got her certification to become a police officer. But she became a therapist for an organization that worked with victims of sexual abuse and with children who had problematic sexual behaviors. And she was really, really good at it. I mean, ultimately, she wanted to counsel vets, but at least initially, it was still too much of a trigger for her. When she was in Vermont, when she was in Vermont, she struggled mightily. At one point, her dad found her in her room, just covered in sweat, with a gun that she was just, clicking it. And he got her into the mental health treatment, the residential treatment. There was a treatment program that was either in Vermont, I'm sure it was in Vermont, but the VA wouldn't pay for it because they would only pay for a residential treatment program that had to be at least 3 weeks long, 21 days or 28 days. And this program was 7 days less than that. But the program that they wanted her to go to was far away from us. It wasn't in Vermont. I don't even think it was in New England. And typical of the VA, it's their way or the highway. And she did not want to go far away. She wanted to stay with the people that she was close to. Yeah, that was a struggle. I'll tell you, it was a struggle. But when she went back to Kansas City, they had a much bigger VA in Kansas City, and we were hoping that Ginny would have treatment, which she did, but kind of typical of the VA, or at least a big VA. They just put Ginny on lots of drugs, lots and lots of drugs. And then, and she had a therapist, and she had a doctor, but also typical of the VA, they will reach out to somebody at the last minute, schedule an appointment. That's when you have to be there. Doesn't matter if you're available or not available. She was in college. She couldn't miss classes. Or they would cancel an appointment at the very last minute because that's how the VA operates. Customer service doesn't mean anything to them. I remember being with Ginny. I was doing consulting at the time, and I was working with a company that was headquartered in Nebraska. So I was flying out there at least once a month, and when I'd fly back to Vermont, I'd fly out of Kansas City. So I'd have a rental car, I'd drive to Kansas City and spend a long weekend with Ginny. And Ginny and I were in this rental car. Ginny was driving because we were going to we were going to some sale or something that she wanted to go to. And I said, come on, let Mom take you shopping. So Ginny was driving because she knew where we were going. And we were in this rental car. And Ginny and I were like joking about something. I don't know. We were happy. We were having a really happy moment. And we were joking about something. And I remember Ginny, we were getting off this interstate. So we're on this curve to get off the interstate. We're doing about 50 miles an hour. And Ginny's holding the steering wheel. And all of a sudden, her hands go up. And I'm like, okay, Ginny, that's not even funny right now. I know we were joking, but put your hands back on the steering wheel. I'd never seen anybody have a seizure before. And then Ginny started to shake. And it became really clear to me really quick that, oh, this is not good. I'm in the passenger seat. Ginny, I'm calling her. She can't hear me. When you're having a seizure, they can't hear you. We should have died that day. We should have hit a tree and died. But I think God wanted us to have a little more time. I had a rental car that had the emergency brake in the middle that as opposed to having an emergency brake on the other side of the car. I pulled up the emergency brake. I grabbed the steering wheel, and I'm trying to steer us off this exit ramp because it was a field and then a forest, like tons of trees. Mark, we stopped within inches of a tree, like this much. It stopped. And there was no damage to this car. So when we stopped, I got out of the car. I ran around to the other side of the car. Before I did that, I had tried to, turn the car off. I opened the door. Ginny is still having a seizure, and I'm calling her because I don't know what to do. So I run out over, I go up to the highway, and I'm trying to wave somebody down. Somebody stops. I'm telling them that, we've had an accident. My daughter's having a seizure. They call 911. When the emergency vehicle came, they took Ginny. I followed in this car. At that point, I didn't even know if the car could drive or not. I had no idea. But I followed in the car. And we went to the hospital. And when we got there, Ginny's starting to come out of it. She had no recollection. She had no recollection of what had happened. I later found out that she had this seizure because the VA had her on so many medications. And, one of the things that a lot of these medications have that they put our soldiers on, trying to deal with some of the mental health challenges they're facing, well, some of these drugs have as a side effect increased suicidal ideation. Like I will never understand how you could take someone who is in a mental health crisis and give them a drug that has increased suicidal ideation as a side effect. But Ginny had it with all the drugs she was on. And so she just stopped taking them cold turkey. And one of the drugs she was on was an anti-seizure medication that they were also using to treat PTSD. And if you just stop taking an anti-seizure medication, even though you've never had seizures before, and you don't taper it off, you're going to have a seizure. And that's what had happened with Ginny. But, it was 2014, and I had 6 more years with Ginny, which I consider a gift. I consider that a gift because she seemed to be doing so well, and she was so happy, and she was such a gifted therapist. She was helping the other members of her unit get their benefits because Ginny had kept solid journals. So when the other members of her unit were trying to access their benefits, and they would have to say why they are disabled, what happened to them, and they'd have to prove it. Like, why do our soldiers have to prove what happened? They were in combat. They were in Iraq. They were seeing, like Ginny talked about, at one point when their convoy was just stuck someplace, and they were having incoming mortar fire all night long. She had written about how she just wanted them to hit us, just put us out of our misery, because the mental torment was so stressful for them. But that's also a tactic of war, to just you're not trying to hit something, you're just trying to make your soldiers just lose it. Yeah, I think I kind of lost my train of thought, but she was pretty amazing.
So you had 6 more good years.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. 6 more great years with Ginny. She was doing well. She was helping the other people in her unit. She became an expert in sand tray therapy. In fact, she wrote her thesis, her master's thesis on sand tray therapy. She was doing really well. People that have reached out to me after Ginny died, who were her patients, who have reached out to me to say, she saved my life. I have at least 3 people who reached out to me to say, she saved my life. She couldn't save her own. But, Ginny would tell me, Mom, when I know I've had times when I've struggled with that battle of, am I going to live another day? And I really not wanted to. But the one thing that has kept me going is I know, because she was a therapist, I know the statistics. And I know the statistics for increased suicide in a family where a family member has died by suicide. And I love Frankie and Katie too much to do that to them. And I hung on to that. I always hung on to that. I know the day that she died. I know that when you're dealing with that much turmoil, Ginny didn't plan to end her life that day. Ginny didn't leave any notes. Ginny didn't say, here's why this is happening. She had a really shitty day. And she had gotten divorced. Her spouse had just been tormenting her. She had called Ginny 69 times the day before, which I didn't find out until many months afterwards when I was able to get into Ginny's phone. 12 times a day that Ginny passed. Ginny had been in a relationship with someone else after the divorce, and she was somebody that she worked with, and Ginny had ended the relationship, and then Ginny felt that this other woman was trying to undermine her credibility at work, which was the one thing that Ginny just so prided herself on was her ability to help people. And, and it was COVID. It was December of 2020. Ginny felt isolated. I talked to her that day. Ginny had gone skydiving, twice the day before. That was something new she had taken up, like in the last 6 months before she passed. And now, I look back on it and I'm wondering, was she practicing to feel what it would be like to fly? Because she was fearless, just like she was when she was a kid. That kid was fearless. When I talked to her that day, I had said to her, Ginny, when are you coming home? Because she had talked about coming home for Christmas. And because everybody was working remotely, she was going to come spend, a few months at home. She had bought a season pass to Smugs. I mean, she hadn't had a season pass at Smugs in years. When I talked to her, it was clear she wasn't doing great. But I still hung on to, I will never, I won't do that. I'm not in that dark place anymore because I know how important it is for me to hang on for Frankie and Katie. She said to me, well, I don't know. I don't want to fly. I'm not comfortable flying with COVID. And I said, okay, so why don't you drive home? Because you got the time. And she said, I don't know if I can drive that far. So I had said to her, I can come get you. How about I fly to Kansas City? I'll drive. And this way you can bring your cats with you. So, you don't have to worry about anybody else taking care of them. And I'll drive. And then we'll have a few days together. She was kind of non-committal about it. So I had said to her, well, let me see, let me get some options from the airlines and I'll text them to you. And that's what I did. I texted her a bunch of options. And then I called her dad and said, when was the last time you talked to her? And he said, it was just, a couple days ago. And I said, well, Ginny doesn't sound good right now. She really sounds like she's struggling. So he tried to call her and she wouldn't pick up. And I was texting her with, here's when I can be there. later found out that Ginny was on the phone with one of the other women that she worked with, another therapist, for about an hour. And Ginny was just so distraught. And after an hour, she said, "I can't do this anymore." And she ended her life. And I know, Mark, I know it was an impulse act. In a moment of just sheer torment. Ginny never meant to leave us. She just wanted to stop the pain. So, her dad and I, oh God, I will never forget. It was the Kansas City Police Department that called him to tell him. And then he came over to my house to tell me. And Katie, who was home because it was COVID, she just had a complete breakdown. She was so close to Ginny. Both the girls were, but Frankie was in New York, so it was Katie that I was with. Jean and I flew. It was a Friday night. The next morning, we drove down to New Jersey. I had booked tickets to Kansas City that Sunday for he and I to fly out there. And Ginny's best friend, who I don't know how we would have gotten through all of this without her, her name was Nicole, who also spoke to Ginny that night. And Nicole had said to Ginny, "It sounds like you're struggling." And she said, "No more than usual." And then Nicole had said to her, "Well, why don't I come on up? Why don't I come up?" And Ginny said no, because they were supposed to see each other the next day. She said, "No, I know you've got dinner plans with Rhapsody," was the Nicole's girlfriend, and they were going to get engaged. Ginny said, "I'll just go." And then she didn't. Nicole met us out there, and then Frankie and Katie came a few days later, so that we planned a funeral for Ginny in Kansas City for all of her Kansas City friends. But it was a COVID funeral, so we were restricted on how many people we could have. But the funeral director, who was somebody who Nicole had worked with on the fire department, I think he was the one who had recruited Nicole to the fire department. He was a veteran, and he said, "Don't worry about it. We'll have whoever is here." Such a gem of a human. Yeah. So Ginny was cremated, and then we brought her home. Waited about 10 months to do a celebration of life in Vermont for everybody else and for her family. And then, we buried her at the Vermont Veteran Cemetery. Some of her. I mean, we've been taking Ginny's ashes places all over the world where Ginny had been, to leave some of her ashes there, to the top of Sterling Mountain at Smugs, and the top of Camel's Hump, which was the last hike I had done with Ginny in May of 2020. Yeah. Let me tell you, there is no greater loss than losing your child. So many others will tell you the same thing. We've had a number of our Vermont National Guard veterans that we've lost to suicide. Were buried at the Vermont Veteran Cemetery. Same thing. So that's why I just work so hard to get these wreaths sponsored, because it means something to me. Ginny had a really good friend, someone she's known since she was a kid. And her brother deployed with the Vermont National Guard to Afghanistan. And he passed away after he came back. Whether it's suicide, whether it's drugs, whether it's the burn pits in Afghanistan. there's a very heavy price that families of veterans pay, more so than anyone else. And as a country, if we're going to send our soldiers to war, we need to do a much better job of taking care of them when they come back. The one thing about doing Ginny's service in Vermont 10 months after she had passed was that we had time to really plan it. And it was a beautiful, beautiful service. I had a very good friend. Her name is Deanna. She did the whole photo video project for Ginny with music that Frankie and Katie and me and Nicole had picked out. And I'll tell you, it's the one thing that I have that I look at all the time. Had Ginny's TikTok on there. Ginny had done a TikTok. She'd done a TikTok about what it was like for her as a soldier, and that she still struggled every day with her mental health. And she had ended it with IGY6 semicolon. That was just a few months before she passed. And I didn't know what IGY6 semicolon meant. And I looked it up after she had passed. And it's IGY6. I've got your back. As you know, in a military family, they all have each other's back. And for 15 months, the 443rd Transportation Company was Ginny's family. The semicolon is for people with PTSD, and it signifies a pause, like a semicolon in a sentence. It's a pause. It's to remind those who are struggling with PTSD that to step back, to just pause, that this turmoil is just in the moment and it will pass. And Ginny wanted that message out far and wide. You know, at the time, TikTok was still kind of a new thing, and she got 17,000 followers from that, which was a big deal at the time. Yeah. We started a scholarship fund in Ginny's memory for women soldiers who are working on getting their master's degrees or a PhD or an MD, who are focusing on PTSD treatment. And we had to spend 3 years fighting the IRS. You know, when you have to deal with our government, when an agency gets so big, there is no dealing with something compassionately and expeditiously, because they just don't care. That's what we found out with the VA. Not that there aren't good people at the VA, because there's lots of them. But as a monolithic organization, just doesn't care. The rules are the rules, even though the rules are stupid. Same thing with the IRS. The rules are the rules, even though the rules are stupid. Even though they could see this was a 501c3, we had to fight with them. And, you know, this was the kind of thing that, Mark, when I was in private practice, I used to apply for this stuff all the time and do it in my sleep. When it came to doing it for Ginny, I couldn't think. When you're dealing with grief, I just had total brain fog in dealing with stuff like this. And finally, Gene found, and I wish I could remember the gentleman's name, but he's a young lawyer at Paul Franklin Collins who reached out. He took on the fight with the IRS for us to just navigate helping us to get that 501c3, which we finally got this past spring. So slowly working on, I've got somebody who's building a website for the scholarship fund so that we can do fundraising from there, because we sell t-shirts and sweatshirts that say IGY6 on them, and hats. And we've had one one of Frankie's teachers, who was also, well, she was also a teacher of Katie's, and she was a teacher for Ginny from Essex Middle School. She lost her son. She donated a quilt to us that she made that we could raffle off. So we'll do that once we have the website up and going. We're slowly getting it together. We've raised about $100,000 so far. When I rewrote my estate plan and Jean his, we made sure that Ginny's share, which would have gone to Ginny, is now going to her scholarship fund for other women soldiers. So, we're slowly starting to figure out what life looks like without Ginny physically here. And honestly, I could spend hours telling you about, I know Ginny is still here because the signs have been so profound. Still not the same. So that first December, after Ginny had passed, me and the girls, I had bought wreaths for Ginny and for her two uncles, Jean's two brothers, who are both buried at Vermont Veterans Cemetery. His brother Gary is right next to Ginny. And I had also sponsored wreaths for Vermont Veterans Memorial Cemetery through Wreaths Across America. So we had gone to the cemetery on December 11th, which was the first anniversary of Ginny's dying, and had placed our wreaths. And then we came back the following Saturday for the wreath laying for Wreaths Across America. And, and I didn't know anything about Wreaths Across America and how all this stuff worked. I just showed up because I wanted to share my respects for everybody else who was there. Mark, there were less than 300 wreaths sponsored for over, and I think I sponsored 10 of them, and I think Jean sponsored 10 of them that year. And there's over 3,000 graves that needed a wreath. But to see so few of those graves without a wreath. So the following year, we got more than, at the time, the website for Wreaths Across America for Vermont Veterans Cemetery had said that we needed 1,500 wreaths sponsored. Well, we blew past that. I think we had almost 1,800 sponsored. And then we show up for the wreath laying, and all those wreaths get put on a grave. And I'm like looking around going, what the hell? Like, more than half of them still didn't have a wreath. Like, what's the deal? Later found out that the site director had not increased the number of wreaths that were needed. So the following year, which was last year, the goal was increased to whatever it was, 3,500. Shaw's Supermarket reached out to me, and I can't even begin to tell you how great they are. They donated a boatload of wreaths. This year, they've donated 1,000 wreaths. And then Shaw's came back on the Wreaths Across America wreath laying day with a boatload of volunteers, and they brought hot beverages and snacks for people. I just can't say enough good things about those folks. And last year we had, I think, over 200 volunteers who came to place those wreaths. It was phenomenal. We were still a couple hundred wreaths short, but we came so close. So this year there's a new site director for Vermont Veterans Memorial Cemetery. The goal is just under 5,000 wreaths. We've covered half of them so far. And then Shaw's is donating 1,000. So we still have 1,500 to go. And I am just praying that this will be the year that we cover every one of those graves. National Life has always sponsored 200 wreaths. They've been phenomenal. I'm hoping that we can get more Vermont companies to sponsor wreaths. I know that it seems like a small thing to put a wreath on a grave, but I can't tell you how many of the people that were at that wreath laying last year were veterans and their families, and how important it is for them to see that we care that people truly appreciate the sacrifice that they made, and that when they're gone, their sacrifice is still going to be remembered. That means a lot. Last year, I remember talking to one family. It was 4 generations of them were there. So from the very youngest to the very oldest. And the number of children that came who took the wreath, placed it on the ground in front of the headstone, and said that soldier's name out loud so they would not be forgotten. It's an incredible experience, and one that just means a lot. So, we also have 40th and Allen as well. They need just over 500, so we got to make sure that we get them covered too. Last year they hit 100%, and this year we want them to hit 100% again. So that's kind of where my focus has been. I try really hard to, and I've gotten some. Oh my gosh, I've got a small group of wonderful moms and people who are from veterans families who just want to help. And the folks who have helped, they're phenomenal. Gail Billings from Randolph, she came to the wreath laying in 2022, where we had like half of them covered. And she was so moved by the fact that, like, what do we do with all these other graves? They don't have a wreath. That she has put her heart and soul into helping us get more of these graves covered. Val Pilata, we all know what Val does with Josh's house. She too has been, she's become a friend. And we just try to help each other through the really tough times. I know that there are people out there who don't understand, who feel like, for me, it will be 4 years in December. I think Val just had 10 years. But there are people who don't understand why do you still have brain fog for 2 weeks in December? Why is Veterans Day so hard for you? Why is Memorial Day so hard for you? Why do I go to Ginny's grave on her birthday and watch that video and sob? It's because for us, for one thing, this just defies a natural order of things. Children are supposed to outlive their parents. That's how it's supposed to be. And for us, every day, it's not that it's 4 years. Every day we wake up and it's another day without them. It's another day that we live with a loss. So, when people say, you should move on, there's no moving on. We live for the day when we will rejoin them, which is something that I believe. But, I also got to deal with. I also have 2 other children who are here. It's a struggle. I tell you, struggle. So, yeah. Every day we cope with the loss. Every single day. And yes, there are days that are better than others. I'm starting to learn that my joy can coexist with my profound sadness. And I don't need to feel guilty about it. But my profound sadness is still there every single day. And for a parent who has lost a child, it doesn't matter how the loss happened. It doesn't matter whether they're a veteran or not a veteran. It doesn't matter if they are an adult or they were an infant or somewhere in between. Losing a child is a loss like no other. And for the people that have asked ignorant things, I pray that I don't want them to remain blissful. I pray that they never truly understand what this feels like, because I wouldn't wish that kind of pain on anybody. Ginny's dad, I'm sure, would tell you the same thing. So would her sisters. So would her friends. You know, we just miss her.
You'll find a link to sponsor wreaths for Vermont veterans on this 802 News episode homepage. Do it for Ginny. Thanks for your support.